Thanks.
Two of them or just the one?
Probably just the one.
Okay.
I'll hand it off. Oh, you're saying for David. That's right.
Yeah,
That's a
I
good
need
idea.
to.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, it does go through the mess.
Hi, it's about 9 minutes to. For those of you who are on the phone, if you could please put your phone on mute or silent, it'd be greatly appreciated. And then when you have a question or a comment, please just take your phone off of mute or silent at that time, and then go right ahead and ask your question or make your comment. We'll be starting in about 8 minutes. David. Yeah. This works good. You know how to turn it on?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's on top. There you go. Yeah, it's chilly. It's chilly. We'll be starting in about 4 minutes. How are you? Hi, David. Is the heat on? Yeah. Oh, it's right there. Here you go. You got it, Sam. Here. You got it. Okay. Hello.
Has joined the conference.
For those of you who are on the call, if you could please put your phone on mute or silent, it'd be greatly appreciated. And once you have a question or comment, please take your phone off of mute or silent and just go right ahead and ask your comment or question. It is now 1 o'clock, and I would like to thank you all for being here. And for those of you who are on the phone or watching via YouTube, thank you as well for being here and participating in our OIR chat, the first one for 2022. For those of you who do not know what OIR stands for, it's Office of Insurance Regulation. We are regulated as a continuing care retirement community, life plan community through the Office of Insurance Regulation by the state of Florida. The code is 651, and that's something that we review with the resident council board chair. We review that document with them once he or she becomes president of the resident council within 30 days. It's a major of major importance to us because it tells us all the rules and guidelines for a continuing care retirement community. So with that, obviously Etta is not here, and I think most of you have heard about the loss of Etta's mom. So Etta asked me to lead you in prayer today, and I'm honored to do so. Heavenly Father, thank you for gathering us on this day here at Florida Presbyterian Home, this day that you have made. And we ask for those staff and residents who are experiencing loss of a loved one in their life, that you give them peace. Only you can provide them with peace and support that is from God the Father. We continue to ask you to guide us in our mission and our ministry that is Florida Presbyterian Homes, looking to you in everything we do. We continue to seek your guidance. In your name we pray. Amen. Happy Valentine's Day. I see quite a few people in red. I'm in burgundy, so not quite. But thank you so much for being here, and thank you. Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. I'm going to leave my mask off, so those who can, it's easier to read lips, will be able to do that. And once David comes up, I'll put my mask back on, and we'll go through the presentation, his presentation. The agenda today for Office of Insurance Regulation, we're required to go through a little different CEO Executive Director report. I'm responsible for sharing any motions that come from the board in their most recent meeting. The board meets quarterly. And so the board recently held their board meeting in January, and so you'll be hearing on the motion. You'll be hearing on the motions from that meeting. So we'll go through that, and then I'll go through some of the strategic plan updates and initiatives that are going on here at Florida Presbyterian Homes. Then I'll turn it over to David Larson, our Chief Financial Officer. And David will give a 2021 year-end financial report, and then he'll talk about the 2022 operating budget. And then David and I will go through briefly the capital budget, some key components of the capital budget. And then I will go over a COVID update, and I'll ask Siobhan to come up at that point in time. Siobhan Foster, who is our administrator at Porter McGrath. And we'll give an update on some of the data that we have relative to COVID as of today. And then Siobhan will provide the report for Porter McGrath. Tasha Saka, who is our Associate Executive Director, is out ill. So Tasha won't be here today, and I'll be providing Tasha's reports. And then obviously Etta won't be here today, so I'll be providing Etta's report. And Tasha was going to provide the life enrichment report for Samantha, and I'll do that as well. Then at the end, anything we didn't cover or any details that you want, additional information of something we've covered or didn't cover, we'll be able to cover it at the end. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And we've got, you should have received this in the mail already, but it's up here on the board. I'm going to work off of this PowerPoint presentation. So the board meeting met, and the governance committee had motions that were presented to the full board. I also want to acknowledge we have not only Dick, who is the resident council president and board member, but also Scott Langston from our board is here as well. So appreciate you both being here representing the board to the organization. But one of the things that was presented in the governance committee was a motion to approve the recommendation from the resident council to accept Dick Huggins and Martha Pope as board members, full voting board members to Florida Presbyterian Homes. And that motion was approved. And so Dick and Martha are the board members who are also residents on the Florida Presbyterian Homes Board. We also had a motion from the Governance Committee to approve all board committee vice chair nominations and committee assignments to the board committees. We have board committees that consist of governance, financial, quality, and planning, 4 different committees. So the board received all of the nominations for the membership of the board on each of those committees. One thing that was different this year than any other year, this was the first year that the board decided that they would not only have chairs of each committees, but also vice chairs to each committee. So that way, if a chair wasn't able to serve in the function during that period for that committee, the vice chair would step forward on their behalf and facilitate the meeting. So this is the first time we've done that, and so they approved all of the vice chairs and all of the committee assignments. In planning, the board motion from the planning department was they reviewed the strategic action plans for wellness, employee satisfaction, life enrichment, and Porter McGrath. And I'm going to go through and present on those right after we cover some of the basic business. I'll cover the wellness program, the Porter McGrath, all of our planning initiatives I'll cover with you. One of the residents had asked me a while back, it would be good to give an overview of the independent living and residential living openings. So how many apartments, how many houses are open? So right now in independent living, we have 7 open apartments, which is good. We've had a lot of progress. Cher has made a lot of progress, because you remember not that long ago we were at about 13 independent living apartments. We have 4 apartments that are under contract, and we have 2 that aren't available to sell right now because they're under renovation, which means before we put them into the market, we're replacing cabinets, replacing flooring, and updating the units. In residential living, we have 1 open house, we have 1 house that's under contract, and 2 houses that are under renovation to sell. So again, like the apartments, those 2 houses that are under renovation, it's renovating them so we can put them on the market to sell them. So that gives you an idea in independent living and in residential living where we are. For those of you who've been here as long as I have, so 3 years or more, you may remember when I first started in 2019, I think within my first month, we got contacted by the Office of Insurance Regulation. At the time, the Office of Insurance Regulation was supposed to come out on campus and do an assessment of the organization to make sure we're meeting the OIR guidelines. So they basically just focus on governance, resident contracts, resident information, and how we're communicating, with the resident council president. So primarily that's what they're looking at, to make sure we're abiding by the guideline. The assessment was for the year 2011 through 2018. So it was prior to David or I being here. They're supposed to come out regularly, I think roughly every 3 years, and they hadn't been out, for 7 years. And so when they came, we worked with them, they did their full assessment, they completed that assessment, and David and I received that document, I believe it was November. And then from that point, we were communicating with the Office of Insurance Regulation, and we finalized our plan to address the issues that were brought forth by OIR. So that document, Janine is going to be placing that document, both the assessment of the OIR, as well as our response to their assessment, any corrections that we were to make, and that will go into the OIR binders. So you guys go, what is that? What's an OIR binder? The binders are kept at Ann's desk, at Carol's desk, and at the hostess stand in the dining room. Janine, once she has put the data in to those binders, will send out a notice to all residents that the assessment that OIR did and our response to that assessment is in those binders for your review. That's one of the requirements that OIR has, by the way, is that that is shared through those binders to the residents. And so once we get that done, we'll send that out to you so you're aware of when those will be available. When you look at the type of things that they looked at, they go through and will pull resident files. So remember, they were pulling from 2011 through 2018. So they're going through, they were pulling dozens of resident files and reviewing them. They were looking to see, was the organization filing this information appropriately? Were they adhering to refunds appropriately? What was being done? And overall, I think the organization did an okay job in 2011 and 2018, but they did find in some of the contracts and some of the information that the communication, as an example, with the president of the resident council wasn't consistent. So as I shared with you earlier, one of the things that we're required to do is once a president is voted on by the board as the nomination into the January board meeting and they're approved as a resident council president and a board member, once Dick was approved by you as the resident council president, it's a 30-day window that we have to meet to go through it with him and review all this 651 information. In the past, that wasn't being done, or it wasn't captured in writing. So now, what David does is he sits down with the president, he did this with Martha as well, sits down and goes through the entire document and has a form that he signs and that Martha signs. So that's an example of the types of things that we found in the OIR assessment. And so if you want to look at that, it'll be available to you once Janine puts it in the binders, and she'll let you know when that is, okay? So now I'm back to strategic plan updates. And this is, when we look at the future of our organization, one of the things that again, for those of you who've been here for a few years, you've heard me say that if we were starting today from scratch, and this was a wide open piece of property, and we were saying what type of a continuing care retirement community / life plan community is kind of the more recent terminology, what would we build on this space? It wouldn't be 115 duplexes, single family, triplexes. It wouldn't be 60 apartments. It wouldn't be 68 bed skilled care. It wouldn't be 57 assisted living. What in our industry, in our field, the largest area is usually congregate apartments. That's usually where you have the majority of your housing is in apartments. And the reason for that is apartments don't take up as much land, and you don't have buildings like we do that were built from the 1920s all the way up to the mid-1980s, 1990, and you have 115 rooftops, you have 115 HVAC systems, 115 electrical, 115 plumbing. You wouldn't build that. When you look at new communities being built today, you'll never ever see that they're building more houses than they're building congregate apartments. That's just not long-term a good financial model for an organization that is a full continuum. So looking at the master site plan, the process as we started at phase 1 was the first thing we did was we hired a company to do a market analysis to tell us, is there a market in our primary market area for any additional independent living? So a focus on apartments primarily. And they determined that in this year and projecting out over the next 5 years, there is a market for additional independent living apartments. That's really important to our organization. If that market study would have said no, there is no market for any additional independent living apartments, that would mean our ability to gain density through apartments would have been pretty much impossible. And so that is critical to our future. And if you just think about simple mathematics and look at it from a mathematic perspective, we're seeing the cost of operating as an organization, just like you're seeing when you go to the grocery store and go get gas, that the cost is going like this. And our expenses are going like that as well. From labor, utilities, food, everything is going in the direction up. And so if you have that added expense, but you only have 300 people to split that expense among, it's obviously a larger portion than 400 people. So those are the things, when we look at our financial sustainability, if we just keep doing what we're doing and the costs keep going like this, and you say, well, Joe, how are you going to minimize our monthly fee increase? It's next to impossible unless you start cutting staff and programming and services. So the other option is to increase revenue. And the way that continuing care retirement communities increase revenue is by adding additional units in congregate. That is the strongest position to increase revenue in the organization, long-term and short-term. So good, and I won't get into the detail of the market study, and the reason I won't is because it is something that is competitive, and we don't want carpenters who didn't pay for the study to get the information that we got in the detail that we got. So that's why I don't share specific details. But overall, the market study said there is a market for additional independent living to be developed, which is to us good news. That's a good news opportunity. The physical plan assessment. So some of you may have met Keith or Frank. They were on the campus roughly about a month and a half, 2 months ago. And they were going in and looking at rooftops. They were looking at boilers, electrical, HVAC systems, all of our physical buildings. They were doing an assessment to determine what is going to break down over what period of time over the next 10 years, and how much is it going to cost Florida Presbyterian Homes in order to maintain the existing buildings and equipment that we have. So they look at mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and they evaluate how much money do you need to put in to maintain all of those buildings. And what they determined was it's about $1.2 million a year over the next 10 years. Before I arrived here, we were spending around $600,000 to $800,000 in capital. Well, obviously, capital costs have also gone like this, but also we're doing more projects than we've done in the past. You know, you look at painting for bunker, buying buses, things like that, where historically those were being pushed kind of back and pushed off. Now we start to say we need to do these things. You know, the second floor and for bunker, all these things we started to invest money in, to start putting money back into the campus for capital. It's also things like renovation. You know, like we were saying earlier, the apartments and the houses that were being renovated, that comes out of capital budget. To give you an idea how that, we just wanted to know, before we look at the future, how much money are we going to have tied up in just maintaining our existing campus and equipment. It's about $1.2 million a year just to have it. How is that funded? You know, that's a great question. How is that funded? It's entry fees. So it's new residents that are moving in. We had almost $3 million in entry fees. So those entry fees are what we pull from to use. The entry fees are what we pull to use to pay for capital expenditures. And then the remaining amounts are invested or pay down debt. You know, those are the way that we use the entry fees. Your monthly fees are really to pay the day-to-day operations, so labor, utilities, food, all of those pieces that go into providing you with service and support, whether it's in skilled care, those folks, or AL, or residential or independent living, those monthly fees go to cover the cost of the operation. When you start to draw out of the monthly fees to pay other things, operationally it kind of puts you upside down. And so we don't want to pull from either pot inappropriately. If we start pulling out of the money that we get in entry fees and start using it to offset operations, it's going to erode our ability to invest dollars and gain interest. It's going to erode our access to capital. So it's something that we manage under David and Linda and the team's leadership. They do a great job in managing that for us. We appreciate that. So in the master site planning, there are multiple teams. We have an action plan team that consists of board members, residents, staff. That's the action plan team. They're the ones who meet on a monthly basis, and they work with our board planning committee to make sure that the process is moving forward and it's taking the appropriate decisions coming through that to the board planning committee. So a very important group. Dixieland, Florida Presbyterian Home Advisory Council. So we have 4 of our neighbors who are resident neighbors, not our residents, but residents in Dixieland proper that are part of the neighborhood association, and Emily Foster from the city of Lakeland. Emily is the vice president of historic preservation. The building that we're in right now is part of a PUD, planned urban development. So it is a different model. It's kind of outside of the historic district. But as you go down Lake Hunter and the houses that are across the street, they're in the historic district. And as you move through the rest of the campus outside of the main buildings, you start to move into the historic district. And that's critical to all of our planning, because we need to know what zoning are we looking at. Are we looking at the PUD, or are we looking at the historic district zoning? So the 2 pieces of property we're spending most of our time in considering are the 6-plex where my office is, that 1-story building, and the New York, Highland, Cannon, Lakeside. That property used to be a nursery, I guess, at one time, and where we have that 1-story 8-plex. Those are the 2 properties. Right now, those properties aren't generating any revenue to the organization. And when you think about the 6-plex, it's right in the middle of the entire campus, and it's fairly underutilized as an operation. So as we look at that building, one of the things we'll look at is if we are going to build where the 6-plex is, where do we put arts and crafts? Where do we put some of the residential service initiatives and amenity initiatives? Where do they go? Because we know that those are important. Now, some of the groups have already moved. Some have moved back into the chapel. Some have moved into the game room. But we still have, primarily it's the arts and crafts group that we've got to figure out, if we do use that building, where does arts and crafts go? That's something we've got to look at. So that's the process, and it all comes through the board planning committee, the board finance committee, and the full board. They make all final determinations. We're in phase 1 right now, which is basically reviewing all of the information that we received in the studies, and the board will be meeting later this week to determine whether or not to move to phase 2. Phase 2 is things like site surveys, soil testing, getting some SWOT analysis from our organization leadership to determine where there are opportunities, weaknesses, and threats in the development of a future building. We'll be doing a zoning assessment to look at it with the city to say what would we be allowed to by zoning to build or not build. So that is primarily the elements of phase 2. Okay? Any questions up to this point? Please, Kent.
The reason I'm here is to live somewhere else, because we have to make it.
Yeah.
If your survey asks people if they want to live in
Yeah.
I don't want to live in
Yeah, you don't have to. You have a house. So, but what we're looking at is the sixplex. The sixplex, the feedback that we have right now, is that they're apartments. There's nothing in the market that is high-end quality apartment for independent living. There's nothing in the market. So that's where we see an opportunity, Ken, is looking at it and saying, building more houses is like putting another bullet in the gun. So we're not sitting here looking, going, we want to build more single family or more quad or anything like that level. Now, it'll also depend on what the city will allow, right? If the city says, hey, your density and your height are going to be severely limited, then we've got to take that into account. But right now, the focus has been in the market study looking at straight independent living geared towards apartments. David? Yes, sir. Yeah, we have about 5 residents, some of whom are in this room, and we have a meeting scheduled to review all of this information with them. And the reason we don't have all the residents or a huge group, to work with a committee, if you have more than 10 people, it's very hard to get through a committee meeting and process. So for us, we wanted to make sure that we had a number of residents who have experience in business and development, in architecture, on the zoning commission of the city. To have that kind of representation, we're really fortunate that we have residents that have that kind of background and experience. Judah? Again, planned urban development, PUD of this building and all of the main campus is more than 2. In the PUD, we can go higher. In the R4, you can go up to 2 stories in some areas. Like if you look at going down Highland and you look to your right as you get to New York, there's a 2-story apartment building there. As you look to everywhere else, it's 1 story. So the other thing that could be a possibility is if we go to the city and they say we're open to a variance up to this height. So that would be something where if the R4 said you can only do 1 story, if we communicated and worked with the city and said, could we go to 2, this is what it would mean to our organization to be able to go to 2, we could ask for a variance. We could ask for a variance to do so. But yeah, it's... Pardon? Well, that's the city's saying us there's an attached and a detached in R4, and there's existing in that area 2 stories. So we're saying, we're assuming it's 2, and the city said, yeah, you could probably get to 2, but, they prefer to see 1. I'm sorry. We don't know yet. We don't, because that's where phase 2 will start to do space planning and say, in this zoning, if we did an apartment building, how many apartments could we get with the zoning? How many units, right? And we do the same with the sixplex, Judy. We look and say, in this piece of land, based on zoning, how many could we? Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, no, sure. Please, Nancy. It is. Yeah, it is. I'm sorry. The question was, is the sixplex in the PUD? It is. Yeah. I think it's just the sixplex. I think it is the parking lot. It's the parking lot and the sixplex to the lake. That's all right. But right now, like, I don't have a whole lot of answers beyond what I've shared with you. If you said, what's the size of the apartments, what type of contract, how much you're going to charge, I don't have any of that at this point. The idea in phase 2 is to start adding information, gathering more information, so we can start to answer some of those questions as we move forward. And then ultimately in phase 3, you're bringing in an architect, you're bringing in engineers, you're bringing in a general contractor, and you're saying, okay, here's what the information's telling us. It tells us we can build up to this many apartments, this height. It tells us we can do this type of construction. Those are the things I don't have right now. But once I get them in phase 3, I'll have a lot more information to be able to share. Please, Sissy. Good question. A question about, is there a possibility to get grants to help support some of this? It's interesting. I've worked in fundraising for our field. That's how I started in this field for a continuing care community. And most organizations that are like Publix or grant-making organizations, they don't donate money for you to build a building that you're going to charge people to live in. It's not, if it was HUD, if it was a low income, if we were building a low income project, we could seek grants. It'd be a lot easier, from Talbot House and, right. Right. The key is, if you build something that is low income or HUD, there are access to grants. But if it's something that's a higher end, like what we have historically on the campus, you wouldn't get, not likely you'd get grants. Now, if your brother was the head of Publix and you said, I can put the twist on my brother and get something, maybe. But outside of that, no, there aren't a whole lot not a whole lot we'd be able to get. David? So the question is, looking at the entire campus and getting the entire campus as a PUD, it could be very advantage. That's a very good point. Now, right now, we're not looking at that at this point until we know kind of where things are lying with the zoning and where it fits in. I get a little bit of a read from the city that it's not likely that they would look to change the PUD. I heard it was a lot of work to get the PUD, for this building, and that it was something that took quite a long time. So we'll evaluate that as more information comes, David. But that's a good question. Yes, sir. Yep. It would give us more flexibility, absolutely. And so until, I think what the city's looking for is, what is your plan? And right now, I don't have anything anything to give them to say, here's our plan. When we look at this, we are looking at those two pieces of property, but looking to the future and saying, what's the next step after those two? So we'd be able to go to the city and give them a plan that kind of expands beyond those two to give us an idea, is PUD even an option, for the city? But that's a great point. Kent?
The city has a master plan.
Right.
You go there and say,
Yeah.
I don't property, I want its own tax. They have
Yeah.
their own plan. And your plan is done. If I can pass on this change the zoning, and
Yeah.
it's from the plan new development,
Yeah.
that would be more widely than it is now, but it has to fit what the city wants.
Right. Spot on. Yeah, it's what Kent was sharing. It was just that with the PUD, it isn't just what we want it to be. It's what does the city envision that piece of property to be utilized at. The good thing is we have a really good relationship with the city, and that's where They want us to succeed as an organization. They don't want us to fail. When I met with the 4 residents and with Emily, I can tell you it was not contentious in any way. Even, the 4 residents that are neighbors of ours that could be, significantly impacted by anything we do, they understand why we're doing what we're doing. Are they concerned about, what type of height, are you putting up and where is it going to be located? Yeah, absolutely, and rightfully so. But nothing that I would call anywhere near contentious. And having both the neighbors and the city in the room at the very beginning, rather than, somewhere down the road where we say, well, now we got our plan, now let's talk. No, they're going to be telling us things all along the way. And we're going to be learning from them every step of the way. And hopefully we'll be able to meet some of the things they would like to see. And that's what our goal is, not to just say this is our plan and live with it, but to be able to say, hey, you were heard, and there are things we did to amend our plan to meet your needs. Nancy?
I have a question from the phone.
Okay, hold 1 second,
What
please.
is the
Hold 1 second, please, on the phone. I've got a question on the floor, but I'll come right back to you. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No. So everybody wants to have things black or white, right? Everybody kind of goes, it's going to be black or white. It's so much easier when we could say, this is black, this is white. Right now, everything's gray. And the thing that we know, in that sixplex, it's not generating anything. We know at New York and Highland, it's not generating anything. So we're focusing there. That's where our focus is. Now, as we start to look down the road, we're going to look at all and identify. One of the things we learned in the assessment is that Bauer, Haynes, and Ford Bunker aren't as bad as we thought in terms of risk of do we have to take the building down. The initial assessment, the only risks we have that are major are galvanized pipe in the first building, in the B building. Ford Bunker has galvanized pipe. We already had a crack on the first floor a couple of months ago. So that's a big concern. If all of a sudden we're seeing that piping is causing problems, that's a big, big concern. Termites is the other thing. If the level of termites, we can't manage it, that's another issue. One of the things that the market study, looked at is the long-term viability of those as life occupancy, where we're charging an entry fee. We have about 5 or 6 apartments that have been for sale for over a year. In other campuses that I've worked, we took those apartments and made them rental. When we couldn't sell them as a life occupancy fee, we did them as straight rental. Now, the renter only had access to that apartment. They could not move through the continuum unless they were financially accepted to go to assisted living. So they don't have the continuum. They don't have access to the loving care fund. Anything they pay for is paid out of pocket. So if they go to the dining room, they're paying out of pocket for added meals. So it's a straight rental. And my mom was a renter in a community in Schaumburg. So I know how that works. And we knew as a family that the only way my mom could afford to live there was rental. And we knew, though, as she aged and her needs changed, we talked about who in our family is going to be able to care for mom and have her move in with them. So we knew when we made that decision. But also by going rental, we're more accessible to a larger group that can't afford that entry fee. So that's something we are looking at as well. But right now, there's a lot of gray, and we just need to get more information at this point. Okay? It's okay if I move on? It's now 20. Oh, I'm sorry, Debbie. Debbie, go right ahead.
My question one was like looking to the future in market trends. I had understood in the not distant past that some of the assessments about what the future of PCRCs and now lifetime type communities, that it was no longer so much apartment buildings, but rather aging in place. That the individuals or the people would be in a situation where the care would be given in a unit that they're aging in place.
Yeah.
And I was curious what kind of change in the trending for aging in place happened over the last couple of years that's no longer being pursued as because clearly if we go to larger buildings with apartments, then that aging in place seems to be no longer the option, the focus.
So and if I don't quote it exactly, please correct me, but what Debbie is saying is there's a movement called aging in place, and she's saying if we move to apartments, it will limit our ability to support aging in place. Is that what you're saying?
Not so much limit, but it's not promoting aging in place because moving to apartments is more transitional versus aging in place, like staying in a residential living facility unit and then having care delivered to you in which is what I understand aging in place.
So aging in place, when you look at the term aging in place, it's primarily geared towards non-continuing care retirement communities, non-life plan communities. So like when I talked to the neighbors, we talked about aging in place. A person that lives 3 blocks away in their house, they are not licensed. They don't have OIR. They don't have a license for assisted living. They don't have a license for skilled care. So they can make any choice they want to in terms of who's coming into their house to provide care for them. When you move into a continuing care retirement community or life plan community, that community has to follow the rules of the OIR, AL license, as well as the skilled care license. So we, as a provider, by our license, can't go into an unlicensed setting to provide aging in place support and care. So the houses actually are more challenged to support aging in place because they're not licensed. The apartments, we can get them dual licensure under assisted living and independent. So what that allows for is supportive living. So in that model, we can bring nurses to assist with medication management, activities of daily living. We can bring it in under that dual assisted living and independent living apartment model. Where the houses, we can't. So what's happening, Debbie, is we are advocating at the state level to allow us to provide direct care into the houses. But it's not moving very fast, and I'm not sure how much movement we're going to get. There are communities, and there was one on the East Coast, and it was a college, a private college, that wanted to build independent apartments that were set up to support aging in place. So they were a little more electrical setup, a little more technology within the space that you can basically age in place, and equipment and technology can be brought to your apartment. The state, and I think it was in New Jersey or Rhode Island, the state said you can't build that because it's not licensed. And we won't license to age in place by you building a CCRC that doesn't include assisted living or skilled care. So these are the things that when you move into a community that is a life plan community, there is a point where the organization looks and says, is this person safe with the caregivers in the apartment or in the house? I can tell you in my experience, there's a risk point that is reached where the organization becomes liable in making those determinations. And I'll be really specific about this. So I haven't been part of any of these lawsuits. Let me make that clear right now. But I've seen in our field where an organization went to an individual that lived in an apartment, I believe, and said, due to your cognitive issues and challenges, you need to move into the higher level of care and assisted living. And they tried a caregiver. The problem was the caregiver would get a phone call and walk out of the apartment. There were all sorts of issues with a different caregiver, constantly changing on a regular basis. And it was a real challenge. And so that person, we as an organization would say, as an organization, they're not safe in that environment, even with a caregiver. So it ended up that this person got injured and they sued the facility. And on record, the documentation of the facility was this person needed a higher level of care. And what the judge looked at was, you have a medical director, you have nurses, you have a social worker, you've been around for decades, and you allowed that family member who doesn't have any of that background and that 89-year-old person to do whatever they wanted to do, and you knew better. And so the organization lost that suit. And so we're in a different world when we talk about aging in place. Because of the continuum, there is a risk that we carry to allow somebody to just stay and be at risk. So that's the challenge. And each state can approach it differently, but right now, the idea of the apartments, you can age in place in apartments. Actually, we can probably do it better because we can dual license the apartment, and we can't for the houses. Any other thoughts, Debbie, or comments or questions? Okay, I'm going to move on. It's about 1:45, and I've got a couple left. So let's see here. On wellness, Tasha provided that the brain enrichment course is currently in session and at capacity, and they intend to, since it was so well received, to do another one. Allison is on track to have students coming back on campus to assist with the Dimensions of Wellness assessment tool in April for 2 days a week. Excuse me. The students will also be assisting with life enrichment programming 1 day a week. And that is the wellness initiative that Tasha and her team are leading. Under life enrichment, they're developing committees and resident volunteer groups that they will be communicating to the residents over the next few months to build those committees and groups. One of the things I know they're talking about is an AV committee of residents to assist in programs like movie nights and things like that, to train the residents in how to utilize some of the equipment. So if a group of residents say, hey, we want to do a movie night on a Friday night or Saturday night, we have people who are here rather than bringing staff in to do that at that point in time. I'm currently working with Jean in the Academy and in getting information out and communicating upcoming programs, and then looking at the breakfast programs as now that guests are now welcome in the dining room. Let's see. Okay. And the last one, I'm going to ask Kim to come up and talk about employee satisfaction. Kim is our Human Resources Director, Kim Roberts. And Kim, let me give you...
Thank you. Thank you. Everyone who served on our committee for employee satisfaction, I really appreciate your input. And from our SWOT analysis that we did, the number one thing that we are looking at doing is leadership training. Can you hear me? Leadership training and employee satisfaction surveys. We are planning on doing employee satisfaction. And then communication, not just communication to the staff, but also what's going on with the staff so the residents are aware what's going on. So those are some areas that we're looking at over the next year, the next few years, improving upon, and just getting feedback, again, from the residents and from our staff so we can have an engaged workforce, retain our workforce. As you know, it's hard to come by staff nowadays. We have very limited quality staff, especially nurses, and it's something that whenever we get a staff member, we have to do everything we can do to retain those staff members. Does anyone have any questions? Yes. We haven't. Joe and I are actually working on a book club. I've reached out to our HR consultant. We're working on a plan for leadership training. So we have a couple of things that we're working on and planning, but it will be starting by the end of this quarter. We were, and I shared some stuff with Joe. We have to look at what that expense is. So it's something that we're looking at. It's the leaders. Yes, ma'am. You're welcome. Does anybody have any other questions? All right.
Okay, Porter McGrath, there's a short-term plan within the strategic plan and a long-term plan, and I'm going to go through some of the key points of both. One of the things you're going to hear from David is about the impact of agency staffing. There's a clinical impact of having agency in Porter McGrath. Agency are when somebody calls off or when we don't have enough staff to cover the floor, we call a company that provides us with a nurse, an LPN, an RN, or a CNA to cover those shifts and hours when we don't have staff. That costs from a clinical care standpoint. That also costs from an economic standpoint. And David will focus on the economics primarily, but and Siobhan can speak to the clinical. One of the things that last week, David pointed out to us what we had budgeted in agency. And as he shared, in January, if we continue on this path, we're going to blow out our agency budget fairly quickly. And so the team met, and you may recall in previous meetings I had talked about one of the things that Maria was an interim administrator back in October, and in September, Maria was here. We had started a program where we said, let's start minimizing the number of referrals we get from the hospital and accept into Porter McGrath, because we know that a lot of our staff are going to be coming into the holidays and wanting PTO. And if we just keep trying to ramp up and get more people into Porter McGrath, we'll be utilizing more agency, and we'll have more expense and more clinical exposure in terms of clinical care. So we started limiting the number of people we were accepting to roughly about 48 people. That was kind of our max. So we took all of our own residents. It wasn't that we were turning away residents. It was referrals from the hospital outside of our residents. We started to minimize that number. With the agency and what David shared with us, we saw that that plan isn't doing enough. And so what we've put together, and again, this was last week, and now our team is working through, is how many people can we serve with our own staff and just our own staff right now? And that number is more in line with around 30 to 40. There is still hours that we have open shifts. So we'll still have to use some agency, but a lot less agency. And we're working with the agencies on the rates that they're charging and how they manage those rates to hopefully minimize those rates as much as we possibly can. And then as our team adds more staff, our own staff, the less agency we'll have to use. And as we start filling positions, we'll be able to open back up to a higher level of accepting people from the broader community. Again, the idea is that we would not turn away any of our own residents in any of this, but it would be those referrals coming from the hospital that we would lower even further, taking the number of referrals until we're fully staffed. And we talked about this in the census meeting, one of the census meeting. We meet Monday through Friday. Siobhan leads the team in looking at the census on Porter McGrath primarily. And we talked about it, and the staff fully supported this effort. They looked at it and they said, we know that the level of care will go up because we have less agency. And for them, that was a priority, that the level of care will go up. And I know Siobhan's got news to share about, our review from CMS recently. But that's something that I hope will be implemented by March 1st. And I know that we met with the staffing team this morning and talked about where are we at and how can we start to eliminate agency. This is another step towards that. We have a new scheduler who has experience in this field in scheduling staff in the skilled care setting. We were all impressed with her and meeting with her today. I'm glad she started and looking forward to seeing how she'll help us manage that. But that's kind of where we're at. And one of the things Cindy Brown had shared was, she said, think of Lake Gibson. They opened a brand new short-term stay, primarily rehab facility with 100-plus beds. They're only opening 70 of those beds because they don't have enough staff. So they're looking at it and saying the same thing. We don't want agency, so let's limit the number of people that we're able to accept. In the long term, the fear in the world is where do those people go? That to me is kind of scary, and that's where it'll be interesting to see. Nancy? Yeah, we have through Florida Southern, and we have a program. I wish Kim was still here, she could speak to detail, but we have a PCA program where we train through Travis PCAs to become CNAs, and then through Florida Southern, and I cannot remember, there's one other school that we have where we do the internship. And actually Cindy Brown was Kaiser. I think it was Kaiser. Cindy Brown was the professor that was leading that, and now Cindy works as a nurse practitioner, but really good idea. And we've been doing that for a while now. Other questions, David? Because of David's asking the question of could we just take a portion of Porter McGrath and just put agency in that area to serve outside residents only. Because of the numbers of the people who are coming in and the numbers of staff we have, it's based on shift schedule, and you may only, and now if we have residents who are positive, they have to have one-on-one. You really can't make those numbers work. You can't carve that out. But what it does lead to is the longer-term solution. So what we're looking at, I talked about the short-term, what's happening right now, but the long-term strategic plan that was, again, developed through the strategic planning process is working directly with Lakeland Regional Hospital in identifying What are the needs in the community among older adults that aren't presently being served through skilled care settings in our market area? Where are there opportunities for the hospital and for us to partner to bring programming and services to utilize those beds in a different way than they're presently being utilized? And so Siobhan brings with her a level of experience where she's had to do some of these things. So looking at memory care, looking at a lease opportunity with a hospice provider. I brought an idea up, for consideration at some point too. It's called PACE, Program for All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly. So what our goal is, David, is to sit down with Lakeland Regional. I've done this at UW Hospital and Clinics where we signed an agreement that we're going to devote this many staff and these key staff. You devote these key staff from the hospital, and we agree over the next X amount of months to sit down and work together. If you could please put your phone on mute or silent. Okay. But I'm hoping that to me is the long term, is working together. At UW Hospital and Clinics, we were able to get some movement in some short-term projects with the idea that we would co-develop a facility. So I think that's the future. And I'm not saying that's years and years away. I mean, we've already drafted the letter to go to them. Now we're pulling all the data that talks about why they should sit down and talk with us. And we've already got an agreement, a legal document that I used in Wisconsin that I updated for here. And hopefully we'll be able to move that forward. Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, dining. Oh man, what's going on? I didn't touch it. Okay. Oh, okay, thanks. I'm like, oh my gosh. So dining. So this plan has not been reviewed or approved by the board yet, but we had enough issues from our SWOT analysis and from other residents who were concerned about our dining program and have said for years the organization has had issues with their dining program. And what I'm learning from Dean and from Roger is that the recipes that we have are, Dean said, were here when he was first here 8-9 years ago. And he said they really haven't changed. And Roger made the statement, he goes, I think these recipes were written in 1940s. And he said they have never been updated. And you know that cuisines change and new things, health, special diets start to come into play. And when we contacted the company that we utilize today and we said, can you provide us with an updated recipe program? They said no. They said, these are our recipes. This is what we provide. And at that point, we said, well, we gave them a chance. Now we need to go out and find a company that will provide us with recipes that can address special diets and more healthy options. And so we contacted Unidyne, Morrison, Sodexo, HCA, and I'm blanking. There were a couple of others, and we asked them. These are companies that specialize in dining management in our field. To ask them, can you provide us with a whole new recipe booklet and a whole new recipe website so a chef can go out, pull a recipe, and see how to prepare that for gluten-free, how to prepare that for diabetic, how to prepare that, for heart healthy. And they all said, look, you can hire us and we'll bring you a manager, a chef, and a dietitian, but we're not going to give you what you're asking for. So that would mean we basically turn over all dining management. We would let Dean go, let the chef go, and so on, and turn over everything to them. In return for that, not only are you paying the salaries of those people, but now you're paying a management fee on top of it for the luxury of having them doing that. The other thing we asked for was the ability to give a resident a menu that had a picture, an icon that you could look at and say, oh, that's a gluten-free recipe option, or that's a heart-healthy option, or that's a diet option, or that's a low-sodium option. And they said, well, we don't provide that. No one was out there. We contacted Omni, Supreme Care, and Navigator. Those are companies that do menus. And all three, it was kind of funny, all three said, well, you need to talk with this guy named Cam. And so we reached out to Cam, who was at Supreme Care, and he has been working with Navigator and with Dean and I to come up with a plan. And so we met, I think it was Nancy, Roger, Dean, and I met with them last week. And we looked at it's a web-based program, and it has a whole listing of everything that recipes they offer that are gluten-free, everything that they offer that are considered heart-healthy by a definition of a nutritionist, all the options, comfort food, Italian, Greek, Japanese, I mean, you name it, they've got recipes up and down the line, and they work within our field. So we now said we want references. So they're going to provide us with references, and we're going to reach out and contact the references, and then our team is going to beta test their recipes, and we're going to get an idea, is this a group that we want to change to? And we're talking about, a 1-year contract to test it out, to see, does this work? And then some of the things that you guys really like, some folks really like our catfish, they really like our liver and onions. We don't want to lose those. Liver and onions. So we don't want to lose all those, the ones that people order, but we want to add so people that have health, concerns and want to eat healthy have more options to do so. So that's that's the next step now, is checking references and then doing a pilot test run. The cost of it is not real expensive. It's a little bit, it's like $10 a month more than what we're paying right now. So I think it's a good option, and that's what we want to test out, for a year. We're looking at kicking it off, and I know people are going to laugh, April 1st. So the first thing we're going to say is this is not a joke. We're really doing this. Bob? Yeah. This is the first time I'm hearing that is the issue. So I've been hearing recipes and options. So now, if it is the preparation, I'll talk to Dean now and ask him to review anything that goes out, and is it something that should not go out as a tray option. So I'll work on that with them right now, because I was hearing it was a recipe issue. So I'll follow up on that. The question was, what about not just the recipes, but how things are prepared? We've got some new cooks too, so I know they're going through and trying to train them. But I'll look at that, Bob. Thank you. Anything else on that? Okay. Sorry, David. Okay, quick ones. Macarthur front entrance door. We have ordered a swing, like a door entrance with the button. So we'll be installing that into the Macarthur front entrance door where the ramp is and the stairway is. That's been ordered. That was part of our capital budget. We had budgeted, excuse me, in 2022, about $15,000 in capital budget to go to Macarthur. And part of that will be this doorway entrance, so make it easier for people to get in and out of Macarthur. Security gate at the Palmetto entrance. That is an arm that we've been talking about that goes up to prevent cars from going in and out. Rick is showing me which way, this way. It's a swing gate, okay. That's been ordered. We've been told it's 10 to 12 weeks, so just be patient on that one. It's 10 to 12 weeks to get the swing gate in. It's by the workshop where Rick works. The Palmetto Street dead ends at that entrance, and then people just cut right through and come out Waverly. And so that will go in, once we get it in, but it's like 10 to 12 weeks to get that in place. Cameras. When we got the proposal from Jeff on the cameras, one of the things we asked was, you can see a car, but can you get the license plate? And he said, with the 2 cameras that we have at the entrance by Waverly, you're not going to get a license plate. And we said, we want to see a camera, get an estimate on a camera that's low that can shoot the back of a license plate so we get a license plate. The other thing we're looking at is there were a number of cameras that he had on Macarthur, and we're saying fewer cameras on Macarthur and more cameras out in the community. And so he's reconstituting his proposal, and then Rick is going to contact another safety security company for a second proposal. We want to be able to get a better sense of the entire campus and looking at signage and camera works and what could be done there. Okay. System update. So that, I think that was camera system update. So that's what that one was. HIPAA gap analysis. The New York house was broken into in February of last year. There were old computers, monitors, laptops and things that were stolen. We have gone through all of the filings with the HHS, Health and Human Services. We've completed all the documentation. We only had 2 calls on the 1-800 number, and both were asking, what is this for? What is the 1-800 number for? So we've completed that follow-up for that breach. HHS now has that. They can either just respond and say we've received it and that's it, or they can say we want to come out and do an audit and investigate what happened. So we don't know yet at this point. So we'll wait and see, where that goes. But Tasha had said, she said, I would like to do, and it's something David's been talking about, a gap analysis for HIPAA to see, do we have other risks at a level 4 breach anywhere else within the organization? And so we met with a company about 2 weeks ago, and they're going to provide us with a proposal to do a gap analysis to see, are there any other areas of risk for HIPAA information for a breach? And so our tech company, Data Tech, has put in a number of new systems to protect the organization, but we want to make sure we're looking at everything and really test it out. And then by the October board meeting, we're hoping that we'll be able to present that the gap analysis have found these issues and have corrected. Not only just we found them, but we've corrected those issues to minimize the risk. Last thing is resident handbook. Resident handbook, Sissy, thank you for reaching out to me on that. The resident handbook, I applaud, David and Nancy and others who are here and the committee that's been working on this. Right now, Janine is taking the minutes from that meeting that we had and is going to get them to you guys that are on the task force. You're going to provide us with your input and feedback, and then we're going to send it to the resident council officers for their input and feedback. I had one resident say, well, why aren't all the residents involved in putting the handbook together? it would take forever. I mean, it's just really hard to get, 200 people to say, hey, I like this, I like it. Just so we have a group of residents that represent the residents, plus the resident council officers to review that. And then once that's done, we'll publish that. We'll put it in hard binders, so you have a binder that you can pull things out as we send to update and put it in. So that's what we're working on. And hopefully, we'll be able to get that done in March, to get that out to you guys. Anything else? Please, Lynn. Take the house off the historical list? No, that's not why it's sitting there. It's sitting there because we haven't figured out what to do with it. So that's why we haven't figured out what to do with it, honestly. It's on us, not the city. No, it's not. No, it's us. It's us. That's part of why we do the master site plan. So we can say, what are we doing with these things? And we need to figure out, what are we doing with that building? Even when I met with the neighbors, Lynn, they were like, what are you doing with that house? Just to know that house is not connected to plumbing, electrical, gas, nothing. It is sitting on brick. It's got no electrical, nothing set up to it. So we just have to figure out, as part of master plan, what are we doing with it? Good question. Okay, if not, I'm going to move on. And I won't review that. You guys have that. So we're going to switch over to David's slideshow. Pat?
I'm concerned about security on our campus. We seem to have more and more break-ins and different break-ins.
So the statement was, I'm concerned about security on the campus. And I guess it was Sunday, Debbie, that this happened at like around 4 o'clock, we're estimating. Somebody took a PVC frame, picked it up from Debbie's yard, and put it over by the fence. The assumption is they tried to step on it to get over the fence and cracked it. So that's the most recent aspect. Prior to that, we had a bent screen that somebody tried to shimmy the screen and it bent, but they were not able to get in. Hi, Debbie.
It was not Sunday. It appears to be overnight, either Friday or Saturday night.
Okay. So it's Friday or Saturday night, Debbie's saying. So, and then we had 3 residents that had a planter and a pot that were stolen. We had resident Nancy who had 2 men that came to her door saying they wanted to talk to her. When she said she would call the police, they left. So that's why we're doing the camera. That's why we're doing the signage. That's why we're doing these other pieces. And you were burglarized how many years ago? When was that, Pat? Okay. So that's why we're looking at that swing gate over there and the camera systems. Residents individually, if they're concerned about their individual house and where they're at, if they want to add any equipment or gear, they can do that, and they work with Rick to schedule that, and that's at their cost. We're looking at the security for the entire campus with camera, signage, our security guards, and determining what can we do to support that. But we have not invested, we're not investing dollars into each individual house to put individual security systems into the houses. Any other comments, questions? Is David's presentation up? All right. I'll turn it over to David. Does it work? Yeah. Good question. Whatever you
Lights on.
Oh, now it is.
Okay. How much time do I have? Till 3 o'clock? How much? Okay, I can get it done before then. I was probably going to have to go faster than that. So here's what the slides I had prepared for us. I may have to skip a few, giving time constraints. I believe we have a 3 o'clock. Okay. Okay, got plenty of time then. Sorry for going late. Now we come to the exciting part of the presentation, the numbers. So I have the quarterly review for the financials for 2021, a year in review, and looking back at the past couple of years. Then when we get down to the others, it's comparing the forecast, what we anticipated when we were first building the budget for how we ended up for the year, and the capital budget overview that a little bit more detailed to the placeholder that we have for the 2022 capital budget, and then how we looked for the year, and then what our outlook is. So the quarterly results, and I like to start out with the covenants, because the covenants is what drives, or at least one of the things we have to report, keep mindful on even a monthly basis, quarterly basis with our financial constituents, our bondholder. But there's also been a number of questions, what do these really mean? So the one I wanted to show that we have two ratios that we have to measure against. It's the debt service coverage ratio and the debt to net assets ratio. So what are those? The debt service coverage ratio means if you add up all the principal, the 1 year of debt service, principal and interest for debt service, and you look at that compared to the cash net income of the organization for 1 year, effectively how many years of net income and cash received would pay for debt. So when that number there for December 2020 says 248, that means that of all the income, the cash income and whatnot for the community for the year could pay 2.5 years times our annual debt service. And in 1 year's time, December 2021, that number's jumped to 4.5. So we've added 2 years of coverage that the net income and cash received is with entrance fees as well. That's part of the calculation. And that's just what all the other communities measure against. So that's the formula. But it shows that our cash production, if you will, for this last year increased that factor by a factor of 2. So it just means that all the cash that we received, we can cover 1 year annual debt service by 4.5 times, effectively 4.5 years from 1 year's impact. Now, 2021 was a little bit of an anomalous year because I believe it was at the beginning of the year we received the PPP funds of like $1.5 million. So that's effectively how that skewed. But we do have the money. So it is, a factual event. It's not a fictional or a non-cash event. It is a factual event. The debt to net assets ratio, that's looking at the total equity of the company as compared to the entire debt. So all 15 million of debt that we have, when you look at comparison to the capital, which is accumulation of all the net income from all years past, when you look at that ratio, it shows that the debt is just a fraction of the equity. If that number was in here more than 1.26, that means, according to the bank, we'd be underwater. But we're not underwater, obviously. We're at 0.55 for the year. So that means that when you add up all of our debt, short-term and long-term, for the community and divide it by the equity, the accumulated net income for the past 65 years, it's almost half, which shows the strength. As that number gets lower, it shows the strength of the community financially, and as the debt service coverage ratio gets higher, it shows the strength of the financial of the community. Yes, sir.
0.55 or 0.67, those are percentages.
Right.
So our cumulative value is somewhere north of 30 million.
Correct. Well, and we'll see that when we get to the numbers portion of the balance sheet. Be- We increased our value. As many of you all probably experienced in the last 6 months of 2021, the market was just going north incredibly, and you'll see that in our financials. Apologize for the numbers being small. Did try to blow it up as much as we could, but total assets for the year ended up at 61 million versus roughly 59 million year prior, and the year prior to that 55 million. So we've been seeing the assets going up. Cash on hand, and this is the impact of the PPP funds. Assets limited use, these are the Love and Care funds, and that's technically a market increase, market value increase. And fixed assets are just all of our capital, what we're investing into. The current liability drop, that was this year we recognized we got 100% forgiveness on the PPP loan. So we had it's debt forgiven, so it's shown as revenue. But it's a debit to the liability. You reduce the liability and it increased the income. Pretty much the rest of it, the debt has dropped down. Deferred revenue, that's the culmination of all of the entrance fees for the community. And then just the equity portion of it. You can see the equity portion went from 24 million to 28 million. And that's mainly because the period income for the 2021 is 4.3 million. And the reason that is because of the market increases for this past year. And as you can see, the revenue year over year has actually been on the decline because COVID started in pretty much December of 19, all of 2020, all of 2021, but we are seeing a rise in expenses. And what Joe was alluding to, the agency cost made up probably at least over half of what the overages were. Interest is on the decline, but that's normal according to the amortization schedule. Other revenue is essentially market increases, realized gains and losses and unrealized gains and losses. Then other expense would be like depreciation and other non-cash. Yes, sir. Well, right. Well, the debt service coverage ratio is dependent on the market increase, but it's not 100% dependent on the market increase. That's just one piece to the pie. Well, the stock market went up quite a bit. We saw some significant increases. To the tune of that 6.5 million, the bulk of that is the market increases, realized and unrealized. Because our controllable, what we call the controllable, the wage and utilities and insurance and food and supplies and professional services, that's what this operating expense number is. It's been going up. The revenue's been going down. We have an operating margin loss of $882K for last year, but yet the reason why we're showing such a nice profit is because of the market what I'd like to see in this slide, this is the slide of cash flows, and it's broken down between the three portions. Operating is the top. Investing, which is essentially buying capital equipment, and financing is just effectively paying down debt. But we are cash flowing on the operating side, so we do have, and it's funding the rest of it. So it's paying for all the capital. The net change in limited assets, that's the market increase to all of our restricted assets, i.e. loving care funds. When there's an increase in investment, that's a reduction of cash, effectively. And then here's showing that PPP fund forgiveness. That's what we paid on debt. So I mean, over for the whole year, we spent a negative, or spent 110,000 digging into the reserves, if you will. Year in review. So one of the things we'd like to measure is a day of cash in and a day of cash out. And day of cash in would be essentially all the revenue, and it's from the income statement. Cash out is all the operating expenses and interest, but cash only. So we exclude depreciation, we exclude amortization, we exclude the amortization of insurance fees. But here's how we get to that 882, where we're seeing a 1% decline in cash in and a 2% decline, or 2% increase, I'm sorry, of cash out. So it's going in an inverted rate, but a bulk of this cost has been in staff. This is the agency that Joe was talking about earlier, and this is over budget. So I think our budget was it 240 or was it 480? I think it was 480 last year. I apologize, it's a lot of numbers to keep in your head. But this is the amount that we were over budget. Overtime, over budget. And then the new department we had this year for COVID, for all the staff and supplies and whatnot. Here's another breakdown from the income statement. We're seeing a 1% decline in revenue, 1% actually decline in expense, overall operating expense. Not in the day of cash out, because that does include, I believe, interest expense. Then the contribution margin. So, I mean, the margins are slim. It's not like we're having drastic changes, but we are seeing slight changes. One nice thing that we did have is the insurance fees received this year was 2.7. We did project 2.9, so we're essentially short one sale. But you can see we had a sizable amount of move-ins for the year. It went from 7 to 12, and the houses had 7, down from 9 the prior year. Forward. So the other nice thing to have is, even though the operations are in a challenge mode with staffing is our #1 pain point, and it will be for a while, is our cash in hand is still good. This is essentially checking savings, and we do have some investments in SunTrust, but those are unrestricted. They could be pulled for this if we need it. Not that we need it at this point, because I think our need to have in the checking account is around $1 million a month. So we have 4.5 times that. Days cash on hand. So this represents, if you add up all of the unrestricted cash and divided by what we spend in a day, comes to that 305 total. And then just the operating only, excluding the minimum liquid reserve, is 133. Now here's where some of the quote-unquote savings is, even though it's spent in agency, is the disparity here between what we budgeted in staff versus how many we have. And it's actually on the increase. I mean, we were, I think, barely less than 1 in 2019 disparity. I think 18 is here, and we're at 21 vacant positions. So what we save in not employing the staff, we're spending in agency to fulfill the staff roles. And at least the nursing department. We aren't doing that in the other departments, the dining and maintenance. They're just suffering, housekeeping, they're suffering through it. Occupancy is a little bit on the decline. Apartments, that was the biggest decline from 51 to 44. Assisted living was just down slightly, and health center actually was just down slightly for the year. But as Joe was talking about, we're looking really hard at the agency costs, because just to give you a perspective, say the CNA rate, just to pure alley rate is 14 to 15 bucks an hour. Agency staff, we're paying anywhere from $25 to $35 an hour. So it's incredibly more expensive. Nurses have gone up to anywhere from $65 to $100 an hour. I mean, it's just so expensive to employ agency, but we're caught because we have to meet a minimum staffing, and we don't want to just meet minimum staffing because, you know, if you meet minimum staffing, then the care level tends to drop a little bit. So we have to stay a little bit above that. Forecast. So this is just a real quick forecast. I'll probably run through it just for time's sake. But what my goal here in these slides was to show when we projected the budget back in July, August, September, what we thought the end of the year would end up to be and how we compared to where we ended up to be. We had quite a few hits, but we had a couple misses. As we targeted to be at, I think it's 242 for the census campus-wide by the end of the year, and we were off by one. We're off on revenue of $12 million by just a little bit over $1,000. Direct expenses, we're off by $30,000 off of $6 million roughly in direct expenses. Our net loss, we anticipated, I think, a little bit higher net loss of around 400. So point being is that the model that we built to project is a good model to use to project in future. We're able to be fairly accurate to within 3 to 6 months. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. The question is what does this first line mean, a campus census target of 241? That's all the first person, all the units, first person, not second person. We tend to measure the first person because the first person fee is much higher. I think the couple percentage is around 25-ish%, but that's only in the independent living side. So, I mean, it would be all the first persons in each of the levels of living is what that number represents because it has a higher revenue impact. Total residents, I believe it's close to 300, just a little bit short of 300, maybe 296, 297. The one miss that we did have, we're still kind of crossing our fingers on, is CPI. I know when we were looking at CPI back in August, it was 5.8%, or back in October, and we were hoping. We did listen to one of our investment advisors that's been doing really well. They predicted that the CPI would be tapering off, so we went with that. As far as the operating budget, CPI is a consumer price index. It's effectively measuring the cost of what things were a year ago over what they are costing today on a regional basis. And that's one of the measures that we use to build the budget, is what it costs for our region. And we anticipated it to drop down to 3 or 4%, start tapering off for this year. We still do to some degree. But just to let you know is that when we first built the budget, it was at 5.8, and now in December it's 7. I'm sorry, that's misprinted. That's supposed to be 7.4. And these are just the numbers of what I just talked about with the hits and misses. The census was off by 1. The revenue's off by 1,200. Direct expense off by 30,000. And this is where we actually ended up, and this is what we projected. So it's a little bit to go show you that the models that we have are fairly predictable. And it's essentially just a census times a rate. And here's the cash perspective, a net income loss, This is our cash income loss. We projected to be at 638. We ended up being 758. We were expecting 2.9 in entrance fees. We got 2.7 entrance fee refunds. So our bottom cash flow positive. We're cash flow positive for the year. 532 was projection. We ended up at 261. The little questions before we go on. Mr. Tebby, yes, sir. Right. So the question is the net income loss is being made up by investment returns. What we call net income loss, margin loss, is what we call the controllable. The revenues, the apartment revenues versus the wages and salaries and benefits and food and whatnot versus non. Right, so the question is the operating cash burn that we have, will that affect programs and services? It could, but it won't. We don't see it in the near term because we do have savings of do have savings of 4.7 million. But we would pull into savings. We would pull the burn into savings. We wouldn't pull it out of the operating. The question is, if I'm hearing it correctly, is that even though there's not a directed path of cutting services and programs, we are in effect in a backdoor cutting of services and programs because we don't have the staff. We're as far as I can tell, we're doing our best. I mean, we hired a full-time recruiter last year to try and keep up with the turnover in staff. But like Joe said, where are these people going? We saw from 2019, we were just one person disparity between staff that we budgeted and staff that we had, but then these last 2 years, it's around 20 people that we're short. It's not by lack of effort that we're not hiring staff. We're trying our best to hire staff, but we aren't intentionally trying to cut programs and the services, but in essence, they are because we just don't have the staff to manage that. Joe, do you want to?
It's really at housekeeping, Bob, and residents don't prepay for housekeeping. So that's the area where you're seeing that program loss, is because we don't have the staff to do the regularly scheduled housekeeping. That's where we're taking the hit. But in dining, the program is the dining program. There's not a gap in terms of what is being provided from a dining program. In life enrichment, they're providing life enrichment programming. Can we do more? Do we want to do more? Yes. And some of that right now is we are understaffed right now in life enrichment. So Sam is basically doing everything right now until we get those positions filled, and we're close on those positions. So I'm glad to say we'll see that come back. In healthcare, we've been able to meet the staffing standards and ratios, even to the level that Siobhan's going to share with you about our rating. So we really haven't slashed programs. There hasn't been a cut in programs. We've tried to make do with what we have.
Getting towards the end here, the 2022 capital review, we put in a placeholder for the capital budget of 1.2 million, and this is pretty much the breakout. Mostly apartment refurb. One thing that has crept up to us recently is all of our elevators need to be upgraded according to code. We've been given, I think, 3 years to do that. We have 6 elevators. And right now, the price tag per elevator is $52,000. So we're on track to do 2 elevators a year, and that's that one number down there at the bottom, the 104,000, 52 times 2. The housing refurb, it also includes 8 roofs, but we anticipate the number of houses that we'll be moving into this year will require some refurbishment. We do have a placeholder that we put in of 20% of the entrance fee is what we target for what it would cost to refurb a house, or actually any unit. And for the most part, or actually for always the part, Rick's been doing a good job in keeping under that threshold. Apartments are we just separate it out for the apartments, the 4 Bunker, Halland Delay, and Nora Rife. Then the nurse call, we already started on the nurse call for skilled nursing, and then we're going to complete with assisted living this year, which also includes just all the numbers we have for the assisted living. We have a little bit in there for skilled nursing because we had some from last year. The maintenance the majority is just, we do have the truck this year, some to do with the pool, a lot of AC and just mechanical type refurbishment. Our capital policy is kind of set at a low level, and there's a reason I do that. It's set at the GAAP requirement, generally accepted accounting principle requirement, should have a life of longer than a year, and you set a dollar threshold. I set the dollar threshold at $500. If it's something that's significant and going to further effectively the life of the asset, it becomes a capital item. The reason I do that is it's about the only, lack of better words, tax deduction you have for the minimum liquid reserve for the state of Florida. When you do the calculation for the minimum liquid reserve, it's supposed to be effectively 15% of operating expense, 15% of accumulated depreciation, or plus 1 year of debt service. But there's a caveat that the capital reserve portion, the 15% of capital of accumulated depreciation, cannot exceed 15% of operating expense. So it's just, right now our minimum liquid reserve, I think, is approaching $6 million. It's in a cash account that we cannot touch. We can touch under certain circumstances, but for the most part, we cannot touch this $6 million sitting out in a bank account forever for any kind of use. So to increase the calculation for the minimum liquid reserve by beefing up expenses, by having a lower capital threshold, just doesn't make sense in the long run. So that's effectively why I do it. And then, like I said, the elevators. We do have IT of turnover we did change out the servers this year. Next, we're looking hard at the switches and the other backbone hardware to make sure that doesn't fail out. Then we have a contingency of roughly about 10% built in, and that's just for things that we haven't necessarily named in the detail here. Yes, sir, Mr. Bob.
Speak to that. So we've asked you and other residents to identify when and what you would utilize that space for. And we said that if we needed to get a tent and rent, because what we're hearing is there's not you're going to build another big space and have it empty 80% of the time. We don't want to spend money like that. So we're going to build it into the master site plan and look at that. But you know, if you need a big space to gather all the residents, tell us when, what that is, what it'll be used for, and we'll figure out how to do it. Instead of building a big space and not generating any type of revenue and having it empty most of the time. So I'm going to move on here because I know you've got a 3 o'clock, so I'm sorry about the timing of this. Let me give this back to you. Thanks, David. You need a bladder break. So we're going to wrap it up here fairly quickly, and I'm going to just a quick, Siobhan's report. Siobhan, do you want to just give a quick overview? In assisted living occupancy, we're down about 5 units in occupancy. Spiritual life, I'm going to give Etta's report real quick here. We've got Etta put, we will join in fellowship for Holy Communion at Ash Wednesday service on March 2nd at 10:30. The Hunter Herald will have information about our time of fasting for this year, and the devotional reading for Lent will be a season of grace, and we will also publish and distribute a booklet for devotions for Holy Week. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Siobhan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, Porter McGrath update. Right now, as it's been talked about, I think a few times this afternoon at this meeting, our occupancy is around 40 residents. So as Joe and David both said, we are currently looking at what staffing we can use of our own staff and how many residents does that serve. And of course, all of you are first in line. We want to make sure we keep beds open for our own residents. So no one here has to worry if they have some kind of an adverse incident. No one has to worry that we won't have a bed for them, because we will, okay? So to go with that, we definitely, you've seen some of the numbers today, we definitely want to decrease agency staffing. And so that's all part of this, what I call Plan B. Plan A was, let's get agency staffing so we can take care of residents. Plan B now is, let's try to reduce agency staffing, because twofold, like David said, one's economic and one's clinical. Now the clinical economic reason you just saw, but the clinical reason is we have people coming to our building to take care of our residents that really aren't invested in Florida Presbyterian homes. They're here to do a job. Now, our own employees, I have to say, are here because they want to be here and they care about the residents. Not all agency staff don't care about residents. It's just our own staff tend to go that little extra mile for people, you know, and if you're in the health center, you know that Mary is going to do this for me if I ask, and you have also the continuity of care. So you don't have, if you have our own staff, we don't see Mrs. Jones in healthcare having a different CNA on 7 to 3, 7 days a week. We want to have continuity of care, so we want to have our own staff taking care of our own residents, okay? So that's the clinical part of our reasoning for let's stop here and let's take a look at it, okay? So I'm very happy to say that we have become a 5-star building once again. We are in our survey window, and we're expecting surveyors anytime. My hope is definitely to keep that 5-star rating, but we are definitely 5-star. And one of the reasons that we are currently 5-star overall is because we're 5-star in staffing. So we have quite a bit of staff down in the healthcare center right now, probably more than we actually need, which is leading to cutting that agency. But we are 5-star, and we're working hard. Karen, who is our DON, and myself are working hard to try to keep us that way. So hopefully, say a prayer for us. When surveyors get here, they see all the good stuff, okay? All right. Anybody have any questions?
So I know you guys have the 3 o'clock, so it's about 5 minutes to, so we're going to wrap up at this point. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your thoughts, comments, questions. Kent, did you have something you wanted to share? Yep. Thank you all. Thanks. Have a good meeting.